In the stillness of the morning, as the lotus blooms with grace, the mind seeks answers, yet they float in an endless space. Welcome, dear listener. We are about to embark on a profound journey, one that delves deep into the timeless teachings of the Buddha. You may have found yourself questioning life's most fundamental aspects, our existence, suffering, and the nature of freedom. As we take this first step together, let us remember that the Buddha's wisdom has been guiding countless seekers for over 2 millennia. But why are we here? It's a question as old as humanity itself. It's the question that has echoed in the hearts of philosophers, mystics, and ordinary people across cultures and ages. And yet, the answer isn't simple, nor is it fixed. In Buddhism, the question of why we are here is not just an inquiry into the surface meaning of life, but rather a call to look deeper, into the very nature of our consciousness and the path that lies ahead of us. In the teachings of the Buddha, we find not only profound wisdom but also a call to experience the truth for ourselves. Buddha didn't give us all the answers, instead, he guided us towards the method of finding the answers within. Each of us, in our own time, must seek and discover our purpose in this vast, ever-changing universe. As we start today, we will look at life not as a mere occurrence of time, but as an unfolding of consciousness, interwoven with the threads of karma, suffering, and the path to liberation. It is a process of discovering who we truly are and why we are here in this world. So, let us ask ourselves, what is the essence of this journey called life? And how does it relate to the teachings of the Buddha? In this podcast, we will explore the Buddhist perspective on existence, starting with a crucial understanding. Life, as we know it, is part of a grand, cyclical process. We are not here by chance, nor are we bound by the rigid structure of fate. Life is a journey through samsara, the wheel of birth, death, and rebirth, and within this cycle, we find the key to our understanding of life's deeper meaning. Let us dive deeper into this first aspect of existence, the nature of samsara, and what it tells us about why we are here. We will explore how this cycle influences our daily lives, the choices we make, and the experiences we go through. From the depths of the ocean to the stars in the sky, we are all bound by the cycle. We live, we suffer, we die. Samsara, a word that resonates deeply within the core of Buddhist teachings, yet often misunderstood by many. Samsara is the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. But what does this really mean for us? As living beings, as seekers of truth? In the Buddhist worldview, samsara is not just a conceptual idea, it's the reality of our existence. It's the state we're in right now, the world we inhabit, and the conditions that shape our experiences. The Buddha's teachings invite us to awaken to the nature of samsara, to understand how it binds us, and ultimately, how we can transcend it. Now, let's take a moment to reflect on something important. When we think of life, we often view it as a singular event. We are born, we live, and then we die. But Buddhism encourages us to see this process as part of a much larger, continuous cycle. Birth is not the beginning. Death is not the end. These are merely stages within the infinite cycle of samsara. And within this cycle, we are conditioned by our desires, our attachments, and our ignorance. But what causes this endless cycle to continue? The Buddha taught that it is our craving, our clinging to life, and our refusal to let go of what we know that keeps us trapped. Samsara is not merely about physical rebirth. It's also about the mental and emotional cycles that perpetuate suffering. It's in our attachments, our fears, our desires. Every action we take, every thought we harbor, becomes a link in this unbroken chain of samsara. Each time we react to the world around us, whether in anger, greed, or attachment, we feed the cycle. We are born again in the sense that our minds and hearts are reborn into a new version of suffering. And this happens repeatedly, until we are able to break the chain. But don't despair, for within the cycle of samsara lies the possibility of liberation. The Buddha taught that we can free ourselves from this cycle. We can escape the wheel of suffering through the practice of mindfulness, ethical conduct, and wisdom, the very core of the Eightfold Path. The first step to breaking free is recognizing the cycle for what it is. We must see how our actions, thoughts, and desires keep us trapped in this cycle, perpetuating our suffering. We must understand that every rebirth is not just physical, it's psychological, emotional, and spiritual. And once we realize this, we can begin the process of transformation. This realization is not something that comes overnight. It requires patience, dedication, and deep introspection. But with each step we take toward understanding samsara, we move closer to breaking free. And this is the path the Buddha set before us, the path of liberation from suffering, from the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. The body is like a house, built of dust. When the soul departs, it turns to rust. What happens after death? It's a question that has intrigued humanity for millennia. People from all cultures and spiritual traditions have pondered this mystery. What lies beyond the physical realm? In Buddhism, death is not an end, but simply another transition in the cycle of existence. The Buddha's teachings offer a profound perspective on what happens after death. Contrary to the view that death is the final end, Buddhism teaches that life and death are part of a continuous flow. It's not about a one-time event where everything ceases. Rather, death is another phase in the cycle of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. But what exactly does that mean? In the moment of death, our consciousness does not simply disappear. It transitions, moving from one form to another, like a flame that is passed from one candle to another. This is called rebirth, the continuity of consciousness beyond physical death. In Buddhist thought, this rebirth isn't a random event. It's influenced by the actions we've taken, the thoughts we've cultivated, and the desires we've clung to during our lives. This is where the law of karma comes into play. The actions, both good and bad, that we accumulate in this life shape the circumstances of our next life. The Buddha taught that our rebirth is a direct result of our karma, the sum of our intentional actions. But here's the thing. This process doesn't happen according to any external divine will. It is a natural law, driven by the workings of the mind and the consequences of our own actions. If we live with attachment, ignorance, or hatred, our future rebirths will reflect that. If we live with compassion, wisdom, and equanimity, we will experience the fruits of that in the next phase of existence. Now, this doesn't mean that we are doomed to an endless cycle of suffering and rebirth. The Buddha pointed out that we can break free from this cycle entirely. By understanding the nature of life and death, by purifying our minds through meditation, ethical living, and wisdom, we can transcend the cycle of rebirth and achieve nirvana, a state of ultimate freedom, peace, and liberation from all suffering. It's important to note that in Buddhism, there's no permanent self that moves from life to life. Instead, what continues is the stream of consciousness. Influenced by our karma, this stream is not a permanent, unchanging entity, but rather a fluid, dynamic process that is constantly evolving, shaped by the choices we make. So, what happens after death? In the grand Buddhist view, death is simply a continuation of our journey, one that will persist until we understand the true nature of reality, let go of our attachments, and achieve the freedom from samsara that the Buddha so dearly promised. As a flower does not pick and choose the bees that come to it, so do we not choose the consequences of our actions. Karma, it's a word that's often heard, but do we really understand its depth? In the simplest terms, karma means action, but in the Buddhist sense, it refers not just to physical acts, but to the thoughts, words, and intentions that underlie everything we do. Karma is the law of cause and effect, the natural principle that ensures every action has a consequence. Now, you may be asking, how does karma relate to rebirth? Well, in Buddhism, karma is the driving force behind the cycle of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Our actions, both good and bad, create an imprint on our consciousness. These imprints, or samskaras, accumulate throughout our lives and even beyond, shaping the nature of our future existences. Each moment, each action, plants a seed in the fertile soil of our minds. And just like seeds, these actions will eventually bear fruit. The fruits can be sweet or bitter, depending on whether the seeds we plant are rooted in kindness, generosity, wisdom, or in attachment, anger, and ignorance. But let's pause for a moment to clarify something crucial. Karma isn't about some cosmic reward or punishment. It's not a judgment made by an external force. Karma is a natural law. Like gravity, just as you cannot escape the effects of dropping an object, you cannot escape the effects of your actions. This doesn't mean that life is deterministic or predestined. but rather that the choices you make matter, and they ripple through the fabric of your existence, shaping your future. In the context of rebirth, our karma continues after death. The actions, thoughts, and intentions we cultivated in one life influence the conditions of the next. It's not as though a new soul enters a new body, it's the same stream of consciousness, shaped by past actions, moving from one life to the next. So, if in this life, we've cultivated greed, hatred, or delusion, the next life may be one of suffering, confusion, or hardship. But if we live with compassion, mindfulness, and wisdom, the karmic consequences will lead to a more favorable rebirth. This is where the idea of personal responsibility comes into play. We have the power to shape our future by being mindful of our actions in the present. The Buddha taught that we can transform our karma through right action, right speech, and right thought, through the Noble Eightfold Path. By living ethically and cultivating a mind of compassion, we create a karmic foundation that leads us toward liberation rather than further entanglement in samsara. Karma, however, isn't something that happens in an instant. It's often a long-term process. The seeds we plant today may not bear fruit tomorrow, or even in this lifetime. This is why patience and perseverance are necessary qualities on the path of practice. But the law of karma ensures that everything we do is meaningful, for it shapes not only our present, but our future. So, as we move through life, let's remember that every moment presents us with an opportunity to plant seeds of compassion, wisdom, and peace. And it's those seeds that will guide us, slowly but surely, toward liberation from the endless cycle of rebirth. The mind is everything. What you think you become. Buddha, have you ever stopped to ask yourself, what is consciousness? What is it that makes you, you? In Buddhist philosophy, consciousness is not something static or permanent. It's fluid, changing, and deeply interconnected with the phenomena of the world around us. It is the foundation of our experience, the lens through which we perceive reality. Now, let's look at how consciousness plays a key role in rebirth. We often think of our minds as a solid, fixed entity, something that defines our identity and remains the same throughout life. But in Buddhism, we understand that consciousness is not a singular, unchanging thing. It's a continuum, a stream that flows from one moment to the next, from one life to the next. This continuous flow of consciousness is what drives the process of rebirth. When we die, it's not the same person who is reborn in the next life, but rather a continuation of the stream of consciousness, shaped by the actions, thoughts, and emotions that came before. This is a key distinction. We are not talking about the transmigration of a permanent soul, but rather the movement of consciousness through the cycle of samsara. In Buddhism, this flow of consciousness is driven by ignorance, the ignorance of our true nature and the nature of reality itself. This ignorance causes us to act in ways that reinforce our attachment to the self, to permanence, and to the idea of I and mine. Our actions, driven by ignorance, create the karma that propels us into the next life, continuing the cycle of suffering. But here's the important part. Consciousness can be transformed. Just as the flow of a river can be redirected, the stream of consciousness can be purified and shaped. This happens through practice, through meditation, ethical living, and wisdom. As we begin to let go of our attachment to the self, we start to experience the world as it truly is, interconnected, impermanent, and free from suffering. It's this shift in perception, this awakening to the true nature of consciousness, that frees us from the cycle of rebirth. The Buddha taught that through mindfulness and insight, we can cut through the ignorance that binds us to samsara. We can stop the wheel of suffering, and ultimately, Nirvana, the cessation of suffering, becomes possible. In the end, the nature of consciousness is not about clinging to a fixed identity or self, but about understanding that we are part of a larger whole. Just as a wave rises and falls in the ocean, our consciousness arises and dissolves, moment by moment, lifetime by lifetime. But unlike the wave, we don't have to be tossed around by the forces of craving, anger, and ignorance. By cultivating wisdom and compassion, we can learn to flow with the currents of life, free from the suffering of attachment. Nirvana is not a place, but a state of being. It is the freedom from the chains of desire and suffering. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live free from pain, fear, and desire? What would it be like to experience life without attachment? without the constant craving for more things, more approval, more comfort. This is the promise of nirvana, and it is the ultimate goal in Buddhism. Nirvana is often misunderstood. We tend to think of it as some distant, otherworldly state, a kind of paradise that we enter after death. But in truth, nirvana is a state of mind, a profound realization of the nature of reality. It's not a place or a reward, it's the end of suffering. The cessation of the mental afflictions that cause us to be trapped in the cycle of samsara. The word nirvana literally means blowing out or extinguishing. It refers to the extinguishing of the fires of desire, hatred, and ignorance, the very forces that keep us trapped in the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. In essence, nirvana is the freedom from craving, the liberation from the clutches of self-centeredness and attachment. When we experience nirvana, it's as though the smoke of ignorance clears, revealing the clarity of the true nature of existence. But how does one reach nirvana? It's not something that can be obtained by simply wishing for it or by accumulating material wealth or fame. Nirvana requires deep practice and insight into the nature of reality. It requires the cultivation of mindfulness, wisdom, and compassion. By understanding the true nature of suffering, we can begin to let go of the causes of suffering, the attachments and desires that bind us to the wheel of samsara. At the core of nirvana is the realization of impermanence, the understanding that everything in life is temporary. Our bodies, our possessions, our emotions, and even our thoughts are all subject to change. When we truly grasp this truth, we begin to release our attachment to them. We no longer cling to things, people, or experiences, because we understand that they are fleeting. This freedom from attachment is what brings peace to the heart. Nirvana is also the realization of non-self, anatta. The belief in a permanent, unchanging self is the root of all suffering. Once we let go of this illusion, we can experience the world as it is, interconnected, dynamic, and ever-changing. In this state of non-attachment, there is no I or mine, only the unfolding of life in all its beauty and impermanence. When we talk about nirvana, we're not describing an escape from the world, but rather a shift in perception. We are still living, still interacting with the world, but we are no longer bound by it. We are free from the constant pull of desire and aversion. We can act with wisdom, compassion, and equanimity, regardless of the circumstances. In this way, nirvana is not some distant goal to be reached in the afterlife. It is a state of freedom that can be realized in this life, through deep practice and understanding. The Buddha didn't say, wait until death to experience nirvana. He said, live now with mindfulness, wisdom, and compassion, and nirvana will be your experience. Nirvana is, ultimately, the end of suffering, but it is also the beginning of a profound inner peace, a peace that is not dependent on external circumstances. It's the realization that, even though the world around us is full of change and uncertainty, we can find a place of stillness within, a place where the storms of desire and fear no longer have the power to disturb us. The mind is everything. What you think, you become. Buddha. Now that we've explored the nature of existence, the cycle of samsara, and the liberation that nirvana offers, the question that naturally arises is, how do we live a meaningful, purposeful life? How do we apply the wisdom of the Buddha to our daily existence? To make each moment count? In the Buddhist teachings, the path to living with purpose isn't about acquiring more material wealth, fame, or success. It's not about creating a life free of challenges or difficulties. For we know that life is full of both joy and sorrow, pleasure and pain. Instead, the Buddhist path encourages us to live mindfully, to cultivate a deep sense of awareness in every aspect of our lives, and to act with wisdom and compassion toward others and ourselves. One of the key teachings in Buddhism is the middle way, a path of moderation, avoiding the extremes of indulgence and self-denial. This principle applies to all areas of life, our relationships, our work, and our personal desires. It's about finding a balance between enjoyment and discipline, between effort and surrender. When we follow the middle way, we stop chasing after things that only give temporary satisfaction and start focusing on what brings lasting peace and joy. But what does it mean to live mindfully? To live mindfully means to be fully present in each moment, to engage with life without distractions, to experience the world with a clear and open heart. It means not rushing through life in pursuit of some distant future goal but appreciating the here and now. Every breath, every step, every word, and every action is an opportunity to practice mindfulness. Mindfulness also means acknowledging the impermanence of life and the inevitability of change. When we live with this understanding, we learn not to cling to the past or worry about the future. We become more accepting of things as they are, finding peace even in moments of uncertainty or difficulty. Alongside mindfulness, the Buddha taught that living with wisdom is essential. Wisdom is not just knowledge, but the ability to see things as they truly are. It's the ability to recognize the impermanent nature of all things, to understand the interconnectedness of life, and to act in ways that promote the well-being of all beings. Wisdom guides our decisions, helping us to act from a place of compassion rather than selfishness or fear. To live with purpose, we must also cultivate compassion, the ability to care deeply for others, to feel their pain as our own, and to act in ways that reduce suffering in the world. Compassion is not limited to those we love or those who are close to us. It extends to all beings, regardless of their background or circumstances. It's about seeing the humanity in everyone and recognizing that we are all interconnected. In Buddhism, this is known as metta, or loving kindness. It is the unconditional love and compassion that we offer to others, without expecting anything in return. When we live with metta, we create a world filled with understanding, kindness, and peace. One important practice in living with purpose is to cultivate gratitude. By reflecting on the many blessings we have in life, our health, our relationships, the beauty of nature, even the smallest moments of joy, we train our minds to appreciate the present rather than dwell on what we lack. Gratitude shifts our focus from what we do not have to what we already possess. And in doing so, it enriches our lives immeasurably. But living with purpose is not just about feeling good or being kind. It's also about taking responsibility for our actions. The Buddha taught us the law of karma, that our actions, words, and thoughts have consequences. This means that everything we do matters. When we act with wisdom, compassion, and mindfulness, we create positive karma, actions that lead to happiness and peace. But when we act out of ignorance, selfishness, or hatred, we create negative karma that binds us more tightly to the cycle of suffering. Living with purpose, then, is not about avoiding suffering or seeking pleasure. It is about living in alignment with the truth of who we are and our interconnectedness with all beings. It's about acting in ways that promote peace, understanding, and harmony, not only in our own lives but in the lives of others as well. Peace comes from within, do not seek it without. Buddha. As we come to the end of our journey together, it's important to reflect on the profound truths we've explored today. From the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, to the wisdom of living with purpose, the teachings of the Buddha offer us timeless guidance for navigating the complexities of life. We began by examining the concept of samsara, the endless cycle of suffering and rebirth. We learned that this cycle is driven by our attachments, desires, and ignorance. The Buddha's path offers us a way out of this cycle by cultivating wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline. Through this path, we can begin to break free from the patterns of suffering that bind us, moving toward liberation and peace. In our journey, we also touched upon the nature of karma and the consequences of our actions. Every thought, word, and deed creates an imprint, shaping our future experiences. Understanding this law helps us to act with greater awareness and responsibility, knowing that our actions can create either suffering or peace for ourselves and others. The Buddha's teachings also led us to the realization that nirvana is not an abstract or distant goal. It is the cessation of suffering, a state of inner peace and freedom that is available to us all. Nirvana is not something to be attained in some far-off future, but rather something to be realized in the present moment. It is found in the stillness of the mind, the clarity of insight, and the compassion that arises from understanding the true nature of reality. But perhaps the most important lesson from the Buddha's teachings is that we have the power to shape our lives. Our thoughts, our actions, and our intentions are the building blocks of our reality. We may not be able to control external circumstances, but we can control how we respond to them. By choosing the path of wisdom, mindfulness, and compassion, we can create a life of meaning and purpose. As you go forward in your life, remember that the path of the Buddha is not a one-time event, but a continuous journey. There will be challenges, there will be setbacks, and there will be moments of doubt. But in those moments, remind yourself that the path to peace and liberation is always available. Each moment is an opportunity to practice, to reflect, and to grow. And finally, remember that you are not alone on this journey. The Buddha's teachings have been passed down through generations, and today they continue to inspire and guide millions of people around the world. You are part of a larger community, a global family of individuals who seek peace, understanding, and the freedom that comes from awakening to the truth of who we are. May you walk the path with wisdom and compassion, and may you find peace in each step along the way. Remember, the true purpose of life is not to avoid suffering or to accumulate material wealth, but to awaken to the true nature of reality and live in harmony with it. In the end, the path to enlightenment is not about reaching some distant goal. It is about embracing each moment with full awareness, with an open heart, and with a deep sense of gratitude. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings live with peace and joy. This concludes our exploration of the Buddhist perspective on life, death, and rebirth. Remember that each step on this path, no matter how small, brings us closer to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. Let's carry these teachings with us as we move forward, cultivating mindfulness, wisdom, and compassion in every aspect of our lives.